and getting everything ready so they can be on the ground.
Chris, what state is that in?
We're working both in Pennsylvania and in Kentucky, and we're probably going to expand out to Southern Ohio and West Virginia.
Have you made it to Bradford, Pennsylvania yet?
Bradford's right next door to where we are. We're out of Warren. So I've been meaning to get over there, but I did drive over there. I think we went over there to make it to the car dealership. We were renting cars. So I think so. Did you stay there for a while?
I was invited. There's some magnate who used to have a lot of money from oil and steel and coal, built this massive retreat center. And I went there and I got a refrigerator magnet, which portrayed the downtown of Bradford, which looked pretty sad, as many of those old industrial cities do.
Yeah, that's definitely Warren. It was a timber town, super wealthy, beautiful houses, and then it became an oil town, prospered, and then both of those sort of fell away. And you can go buy, 125-year-old, 140-year-old house for like $50,000, brick mansions. So, if you want a really cheap, nice house.
Yeah, our grandson finally was able to get a house, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, new kitchen, new boiler, new roof, $140,000. But he bought it in Winona, Minnesota, which is where he works, and his wife works at Winona State.
Yeah, and I've talked to folks that do that. Yeah, just you can't all afford to live in Missoula. That's for sure. But the thing is, these folks I have working for me, they're all from the neighborhood there. They're from Warren, and the best they could get paid for any job is about $8 an hour. Like cracking minimum wage is almost impossible. So yeah, but they all own houses, which is amazing to me. But yeah, it would be a hard place to hang out. I don't think I could do it.
Chris, I'm all set up and ready whenever you are.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Chris Rowe, chair of the City of Missoula's Energy and Climate Team, and we're calling to order the regular meeting of the Energy and Climate Team for today, October 14th, 2021. I've got one excused absence. This person may or may not be here, but Virgil is on the road going to a soccer tournament in Kalispell. But otherwise, is this Marty or is this Megan on the phone for the city clerk?
It's Megan.
That's Megan. Okay, sounds good. Hey, Megan, you want to call the roll for the rest of us?
I will. We've got 2 people in the attendees, so let me promote them. Is Nadia part of the presentation, or is she a member of the public?
Lead, or Jean? I don't. It must be part of the public then.
Okay. Chris Rowe.
Present.
Jeremy.
Present.
Trevor.
Present.
Brian. Let's see, Brian. Scott.
Here.
Jonathan.
Here.
David. Nope. And I see Virgil in attendance.
Here.
Awesome. Ellis.
Here.
Aviv.
Here.
Great. Thank you.
They have all the youth team members here. One other person who was contacted me, who's flying currently, is Amber, and she is currently on her way back from Boston. So she's also going to miss today's meeting. Just as a reminder, this regular team meeting is video streamed live and also recorded. So anybody who wishes to watch it later can come back and do it later. I'll remind folks like Amber and Brian that that's a thing they can do. And for us also, you know, to watch what we're saying and be respectful for everybody who may be on the streaming system. Megan is showing us right now ways that the public can be involved in either non-action items or action items not on the agenda, or other items as we discuss them. So hopefully there'll be some of that. Everyone's welcome. All righty. Next up after roll call is the meeting minutes. There was just a couple of things I thought I would highlight and then make note of. So besides, let's see here. We just as a reminder, we welcome Jonathan Carlin, who's here today, I believe. Yeah, there he is, Jonathan. Welcome again. So one of the things I think I sent out to everybody was the public policy that the city of Missoula has with respect to energy conservation and new construction and major remodel. So we will remember to try to use that as we go forward. One of the got some feedback there. One of the ways that can be used is in one of the other things that was just mentioned, which is the public utilities potential new building on Scott Street. And that's very early on, as we heard from Lee and Amber. So that's something we'll continue to work on. You guys unfortunately elected me as chair and Jeremy as vice chair. So let's see here. So that was that. So we did talk a little bit about how the financing on the solar array at the wastewater treatment plant would go. And I did want to make one small change. Megan, there was a mention that the wastewater treatment plant was the largest emitter of greenhouse gas for all the departments. And actually that's the whole public utilities department. And it's primarily the Missoula water. So there was just one small error that I found.
Okay, I will make that update. Thank you.
We're going to talk today about the poplar plantation, so I won't get into too much because we're going to hit that pretty hard today. And we mentioned about the energy performance contracts, but Lee had another meeting to go to, but she's here today to talk about that. And we also talked briefly about the UT member project. So hopefully we'll get into that. So with that said, we have a motion to approve the minutes from the September 14th regular meeting.
So move.
Thank you, Scott. Without objection, the meeting minutes are approved with the one correction that I made. Somebody's got some static there. Is that me? I don't know.
No, I think it's Jeremy. Jeremy, you might want.
Jeremy's the culprit. Man, won't it be nice when we can all get together? I have not had a meeting with human beings in such a long time. I don't know what they look like.
If the static is me, I will go ahead and mute myself.
Right.
So sorry about that.
All righty. Thank you. Brief announcements. The next meeting would fall on Veterans Day, so we're going to postpone it by 1 week and make it November 18th. That's still a Thursday from 12 to 2. So just note that. One other announcement, Michael Doherst, who has been with the team for many years and has been a significant contributor, he has left the team as of last week. He had been with the city and county health department, and he has moved on to another position that sounds like it's going to keep him very busy, somehow through the university, but I'm not exactly sure. So he has moved on. According to our bylaws, we'll need to replace him with somebody else who works either for the city or the county that is consistent with our bylaws. So we'll get to work on that. Not today, but if anybody wishes to put a name forward, please send it on to me. Anybody else have any other announcements they'd like to make? I will note that here in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the climate conference in Glasgow, Scotland is going to occur. So I'm sure we'll all be tracking that, and we'll make some room at the next meeting to talk about how, things at that international level affect little old Missoula, and how those interchanges happen, and whether it does or not. Sometimes I wonder. All right. So no other announcements. Does the public have any comments on items not on the agenda? If they are on the agenda, those people can chime in when we're speaking about those specific items. But if there's anybody who wishes to step forward and talk for the moment about whatever they wish to talk about, I'll just give them a minute to get unmuted or whatever. Megan will assist with that if you're calling in or raising your hand or however that works.
Not seeing anybody.
All righty. Thank you, Megan. Okay, today there are no action items, so we'll move on to non-action items. The first one, discuss alternatives to the Missoula wastewater treatment plant hybrid poplar plantation. There's a mouthful. With Gene Connell, who's present, facility superintendent for the Missoula wastewater treatment plant, and also with us is Lee Ratterman, the climate action specialist for the city of Missoula. So we started this last week, but last month we decided it would be great to have Gene on board. And so Gene, thanks for joining us. And I believe the way this is going to work is Gene's going to give us a presentation, and then we'll do a more interactive question answer, ideas, try to do a little brainstorming. And Lee, I'm sure will jump right in as well. So if that's okay, do you want me to hand it off to you, Gene, directly? Or Lee, do you have something to say first? No? All right, let me hand it to you, Gene.
All right, sounds good. I'll share my screen here, see if we have any technical difficulties. All right, I'm getting that. All right, can you guys see that slide?
Jean, is it possible to put it in presentation mode? We're seeing kind of a broken up.
Yeah. Is that any better?
Oh, yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. There we go. I'm gonna try this. There, that works for me. Okay. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'll give a little PowerPoint here on the poplar plantation. From my perspective, I thought about an Abe Lincoln perspective, but I couldn't make that work, so I'll just have to do it from my perspective. I'll go through a little history, which was interesting for me. I've been at the wastewater treatment facility for 30 years. From 2000 to 2018, I was the facility operation and maintenance manager, but I wasn't very involved with the poplar plantation. So preparing this, it was kind of interesting to me to go back and kind of look at the history and get it lined out in my mind. And now I can share that with you. We'll work up to where we are now. and then we can talk about some future potential. So I found an article from 2011 in the Missoula Independent, Plant Poplars Save Fish. I don't always like when people just read their slides, but sometimes kind of have to. So rather than putting effluent into the river, let's put it on the ground and grow trees, says Missoula Chief Administrative Officer Bruce Bender, who's leading an effort to create a 130-acre poplar grove adjacent to the Missoula wastewater treatment plant. In the same article, the Colorado-based Hybrid Energy Group, HEG, has agreed to tend the poplar grove in exchange for the right to harvest mature trees for construction projects and biomass energy production. HEG Vice President Tom Platt says he sees the deal as a win-win. So, you know, in general, we can protect the Clark Fork River and grow trees, sell the trees, and make all our money back. So in 2013, the city contracted with HEG to manage the project. And this is this view here is from 2013. So it's the Klaus property, you know, before the project was implemented. And in 2014, HEG leases the Klaus property. So HEG has a contract with the city to grow trees, and they hold the lease to the property. So 2014 construction begins. A little better view here. You can see the drip irrigation pipe lined out. The trees are all, the leaves are on the trees, but there's snow on Lolo Peak, so it must be in the spring. So 2015, so after growing most of the season of 2014, and this is the fall of 2015, the trees are really growing. So, you know, in those two growing seasons, they're, you know, it's a little hard to tell there, but they're 6-8 feet tall, maybe taller. They grow like crazy. Prior to June of 2018, there was a changing of the guard. There was a real rollover in city administration, as it has to do with public works and certainly the wastewater facility. So Tom Platt, who's in the foreground on the right there, he was part of HEG, and he managed the poplar plantation. And Tom unfortunately passed away. Heck of a guy, but we lost him. And Star Sullivan on the left, my former boss, retired. And even prior to that, Bruce Bender had retired from the city. So that whole chain of institutional knowledge just kind of went away. And so fresh eyes started looking at the poplar plantation, a whole new group of people. So John DeBari was a member of the city council, and he knew Tom Platt, and he purchased his interest in HEG and took over managing the poplar plantation. Dennis Bowman at that time was Deputy Public Works Director for utilities. So he was over the water department, stormwater, and wastewater. And Logan McGinnis and Ross Mollenhauer are part of the utilities engineering team. And so they're also looking at this, and we're all going, you know, how is this going to work out? So in the spring of 2019, Ross Mollenhauer talked to a professor at the university and was able to use a group of MBA students that needed a final project. And they studied the poplar tree market for us at no cost, and they really did a great job. They talked to like every sawmill within 200 miles of Missoula. They talked to trees or mills that worked with poplar trees on the East Coast and the West Coast, and interviewed a bunch of people, did a really, really great job. But the report did not bring good news. Is everybody doing okay out there? Any technical difficulties?
You're doing great,
We're doing
Gene.
great.
Okay,
Yep.
excellent, excellent. Thank you. So in the executive summary of that report, I just brought out this excerpt. In the study, we found no evidence of a viable market for hybrid poplar saw logs within a reasonable distance from Missoula. Market for ply logs exists, but the number of potential buyers appears to be few, and the cost of shipping the logs may outweigh any potential returns. There are very few outlets for hybrid poplar wood chips, and those that do exist will not yield returns enough to justify this option. So there's no market for the poplar trees. Squirrel, but I'd like to talk about moths for just a minute. Satin moths. So the past couple of years, we've had an outbreak of satin moths in the poplar trees. The caterpillar phase of the satin moth, they chow down on the leaves of, I'm sure other species, but certainly poplar trees. So that picture of the caterpillars on the ground, I was out there this June and took that picture. At that time, they were dropping out of the trees. They're all fat and happy, and they were dropping out of the trees and getting ready to build a cocoon or whatever. And it sounded like it was raining. It was just plip, plop, 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 plip. And I just had to look down. I didn't have to search for those caterpillars. I just looked down and took a picture. And there's a photo there of the moth, the satin moth. So this is a drone shot from 2020, and you can see here, let me grab the laser pointer. You can see these denuded areas where kind of where these guys had kind of denuded the trees in this area. The good news is it rarely kills the trees. In a few weeks, the leaves grow back, and it probably isn't good for them, but normally they just run their course. And in doing the Googles and talking to people, they don't really recommend insecticides or anything like that. They will just run their course. Satin moths. So Dale Bickel, in an email exchange while we were discovering all of this, he said, when I first read this, I thought it said Satin moths, which I assumed were worse than murder hornets. That made me laugh. So this year in mid-July, this picture kind of shows two things. Because in July, the leaves are already coming back. So you can see these light colored areas. These are newer leaves. And you can see the old kind of epicenter over here. They're like radiating out from where they started. And so essentially, this is just a natural phenomenon, and we expect it to run its course and kind of a bell curve, be down to a dull roar in a few years. Talking to Tom Platt earlier in the growing of the trees, when the trees were young, there was a vole explosion, which, by the way, was my favorite band when I was in high school. I don't know if you heard of them, but they would, under the snow, they would ring the young trees and eat the cambium, I guess, and there was some tree mortality. And so the voles were all getting fat and multiplying like crazy because they had a great food source, and that brought in coyotes. And so the coyotes came in force and had a couple of dens of coyotes in the area. And after getting all full of voles, they would need a drink of water, and the coyotes the drip tube is there, and so they would, and then their dogs, and so they would chew on the drip tubes. It was a fairly high maintenance issue, but then that all ran its course, and so it's kind of to me, it's an example of that, a natural process. So meanwhile, back at the ranch in 2019, John DeBari was the first to raise a flag. He was reading the agreement and the lease, and if the trees have no market value, is the project sustainable? The Dennis and John DeBari took a hard look and began cost cutting. And so for one thing, pruning the trees as saw logs, because every year you would trim them up. And the idea is to have a 16-foot no knots section of log on the trees to sell them as saw logs. So if they're not going to be saw logs, we don't have to spend that money pruning them. And then as the trees matured, the canopy has grown in and shaded the ground, so you can reduce mowing. There's less undergrowth. HEG was cutting costs. They eliminated some staff and they brought in a contractor to just take care of the irrigation system and do the required maintenance and operations. So the operating costs, including the lease fee, between 2016 and 2019 was about $240,000 a year. With cost-cutting efforts, we've been able to get it down to $150,000 a year, and that's really kind of the minimum it takes to grow the trees. And in 2020, the city purchased HEG's interest and the lease agreement, which came with it, and basically kind of took out the middleman. So now we are directly managing the poplar plantation. So, if we can't sell the trees and we have this negative cash flow, what should we do? So we brought in Anderson Montgomery Engineering to do an analysis of future alternatives, solid numbers to allow us to make some decisions. Do we keep growing the trees? Do we change crops? Where do we go from here? And so the Water Resource Recovery Alternatives Study wanted to look at these various strategies, including cost and environmental benefits. Taking the nutrients, diverting the nutrients out of the river, is clearly, it has value, but you can't put a dollar sign on it. So we need, and in the vernacular of the study, these are non-fiscal benefits and the 10-year net present cost. So, non-monetary value, this year, the irrigation season ended the 1st of October, well, the end of September. So between May and through September this year, we pulled 588 pounds of phosphorus and 11,000 pounds of nitrogen did not go to the river and went on to the trees. And protecting the rivers is clearly a community value. So the study looked at a limited list of possibilities that appeared to be good chances. So short rotation coppicing, that's the one I'm a little biased towards it. And so if you cut down a poplar tree, or I'm sure I think birch, other trees in the same group, they send up coppices or suckers, and it turns into a brushy structure. And so you can come by every 3 years and harvest that woody material. And for one thing, we could use it in the composting facility. We can chip it and use it as a bulking agent for the composting process. So that's one possibility, and kind of a favorite of mine. Alfalfa, it was looked at, growing hemp for seed and fiber, growing Christmas trees, sod farm, combined alfalfa and sod. Those seemed like really good candidates. So the non-fiscal ranking looked at environmental quality, environmental benefits, or problems, risk, So we kind of got burned on the poplar trees, and the city is certainly very risk adverse. We not into taking chances. So CBD hemp wasn't really looked at because it's a risky market. You don't just plant some hemp seeds, walk away, and come back. It's a pretty intensive process. So just as an example of risk. So also climate. So energy inputs, any carbon sequestration that was considered. Public perception. Everybody loves the trees. I've had people come down to the wastewater treatment plant, knock on the door and say, what are those trees? And they want to hear the story. Everybody loves it. People flying in on an airplane and look down and go, what is that? That's really cool. Compatibility and flexibility. So, as that could be valuable as things change, or how does that fit into our current operations? Implementability. So how many hoops do we have to jump through? How many mountains do we have to move to make this happen? So this is a matrix, whatever you want to call it, of these possibilities. So you have the alfalfa, hemp, trees, sod down here, and then across the top, environmental quality, risk, climate, public perception, compatibility, flexibility, and implementability. Over here on the far side, you have a cumulative score. And in this case, low values are good. So growing the trees for woody material has the highest score for non-fiscal. Alfalfa is a close second, and sod farm ranked pretty poorly. And high energy inputs, herbicides and pesticides. It's a little risky. There's another sod farm in Corvallis and in Arlee that would not like to see a government operation come in and compete with them. So for a lot of reasons, sod did not fare very well. So you could go through each of these and spend a bunch of time, but for now, let's just say that Paul Montgomery with that put this together was relatively objective and thorough, and we can chew this up another time. So the 10-year net present cost. So now this is the dollars and cents. So the lowest is Christmas trees. The lowest overall cost, and the highest was my favorite. The coppicing it costs the most, and then again, low is good. We're not talking value, we're talking cost over 10 years. So I did a little thing just to kind of help clarify it for me. If you take the non-fiscal ranking times the cost, you can kind of combine the two. So if you have a low value, which is good, and a low cost, which is good, you come up with a low number. So if you do the math, it ranks like this. Alfalfa comes out a pretty clear winner. And this is rough. This is just a kind of an exercise to help start to clarify things. Alfalfa comes out really well. And the sod is, by far the worst by this ranking. And my SRC doesn't come out too well. And one thing that's not on that list, but was looked at, is the cost of doing nothing. So the 10-year net present cost of not doing anything is 3.4 million. It's right up there. It doesn't rank very well. The carbon sequestration in the trees is estimated to be about 13 metric tons per year, which is something. But it, compared to public works carbon footprint, it's less than it sounds. We could probably take any savings and put it towards even more carbon friendly projects. So kind of got to look at it a little more like trade-offs a little more holistically. So decision-making, we, meaning the city organization, people higher up the food chain than me, need to make a rational, community values-based decision on the future of the project. And we need to balance environmental responsibility and financial issues. So whenever I'm able to, I like to point out that the Missoula Public Works and Mobility Resource Recovery Facility provides advanced wastewater treatment, protecting the Clark Fork River, on-site renewable energy production, on-site biosolids composting, on-site nutrient recovery to poplar trees, all for the lowest wastewater utility rates in the state. I think Missoula can be proud of what we're doing at the Resource Recovery Facility. And that kind of wraps it up. We can open it up. I'll stop sharing my screen. Where's that?
Wow, that's really tremendous, Gene. There was a lot of information in a short amount of time. Quickly taking notes here, trying to put this all together. So I think your screen is, we're still seeing your screen.
Yeah.
We're seeing your,
Here we go.
there we go. All right, perfect. And it looks like we already got one person's hand up, so we'll get to that in a minute here. So next up, yeah, just trying to get an understanding sufficient. This was a bunch of it so that we can help you with providing information. Of course, our ballyhoo, our area of expertise is in carbon reduction. That's, one of the major goals for the city is carbon neutrality here in a few years, and so which is obviously not one of the primary functions of this, but it could be, depending on how you went about it. So we're hoping that it becomes one of the primary driving goals of this process. Now, you take something that's already complicated and add another significant goal to it, and maybe it sort of blows up that way. It's not a linear thing when you add a second significant consideration. But anyways, and there could be still other ones, yeah, like cost is a third, obviously. The community, how the community feels about it, whatever else you want to think about. So there's quite a bit. So this is going to be an interesting discussion. I'm sure everyone's going to jump in. So I'll try to use the hands up function. I'll kind of keep an eye on that and start with that, and then we'll move forward and see what comes out of this discussion. So first up is Scott.
Gene, this is Scott McNall. That was a great presentation. As Chris said, we learned a lot in a short period of time. And I have two related questions. One is, how long does the city hold the lease for this particular piece of property? And the related question is, if it's a short-term lease, was that a disincentive in terms of trying to sell carbon credits? Or is it possible for a city agency on leased land to sell carbon credits for whether it's sod or whether it's alfalfa or whether it's just chopping the trees up?
So first of all, the length of the lease, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but it's around 20 years. It was extended from a 12-year growth cycle, is extended out, and I believe it's about 20 years. And in the lease agreement, the city has first right of refusal to purchase the property. And I think the long-term goals of the city that we would probably act on that. And as for carbon credits, I'm sorry, I just don't know a dang thing about carbon credits and how we could get involved in that.
Thank you.
Good point, Scott. Yeah, there was some good stuff. So obviously that would be something we could I'll put on our plate is thinking about carbon costs. I know Lee is actually now thinking about that as part of some of the work she's doing. And so whether that you could sell them or use them against our carbon neutrality goal would be some good questions to go on. So we might come back to that yet. So next up is Jeremy.
Gene, thank you for being here and thank you for the presentation. I have two quick questions and hopefully it's not too static. One question, what is the time frame as far as, ideally we'd like to have a decision within the next year, that kind of thing. And I'll throw the second question at you real quick. What happens if there's a solution that does not address the phosphorus and nitrogen at the same level that the phosphorus does, or that the poplar trees do? So if there's a solution out there that would work, that checks the boxes, but has a lower success rate from a phosphorus and nitrogen perspective, I guess I'm just wondering that combined with, is there an expectation that there will be more phosphorus and nitrogen as the city of Missoula grows? Kind of talk me through that process. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'll try to address that. So first of all, the time on acting on this is up to us. I want to have some pretty serious discussions through the fall and maybe have some direction before spring. So would we go through another growing season of the poplars? We can. It's not a big deal. But I would hope through this winter we would get a good feel for what we want to do and kind of work that out. That would be my goal. Now, when you talk about other solutions for dealing with phosphorus and nitrogen, one thing with going to different crops, they do have, if we're still talking about agricultural use and land application, different crops have different uptake rates. And so that needs to be taken into account. And we actually would need, whatever we do crop wise, we need approval from the state of Montana. It's linked into our discharge permit. And so any changes we make over there, we need to get approved by the state. And it's based on, mostly it's based on application rate, with poplar trees having the highest. And if we put in a different crop with a lower application rate, or they can't uptake as many nutrients, we would have to reduce the flow. And so we could just apply a little less water. And so to me, if we could get 85% of the application rate, and get into at least a neutral cash flow, I think that would be a win. But it's certainly something to think about. Alfalfa is very near the uptake rate of poplars. There would be no real sacrifice with alfalfa. Some of the other crops, I don't know off the top of my head. I think all of the options we looked at would be viable, just in different rates, slightly less than poplar trees.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Gene. A few quick questions is, so the doing nothing, was that implying just leaving the poplars there indefinitely and the upkeep in that? And then the other aspect is, could you expand on, it just seems that this might be kicking a problem down the road, kicking the can down the road. It's, and some of these alternative costs, they're getting near the cost of revamping the plant. So I just would enjoy hearing some of your insight onto that as well. And then the third thing, when you mentioned alfalfa, is there alternative markets for alfalfa other than going towards feed for, say, cattle or livestock that may have a lower carbon footprint?
All right. First, talking about kicking the can down the road and doing nothing. The biggest part of not doing anything, and I had to work this out in my own head. I didn't quite understand it. Every year the trees get bigger, and at the end of however many years you choose to grow them, every year it costs more money to get rid of the trees or use the trees or harvest the trees. And so a big part of that is harvesting. So even if they go to beneficial use, they don't magically cut themselves down or chip themselves or however you use them. So they're one of the biggest costs of doing nothing and kicking it down the road too far is you're increasing the cost of ultimately harvesting the trees. So let me skip up to the low carbon alfalfa. You know, I'm afraid that alfalfa is kind of a commodity, and I don't know how you could control the use. Whether it's horse feed or cattle feed, I think as a commodity would just go out there, and I'm afraid a huge part of it would be used for cattle production. I don't know how you could control that. Then the next thing is, could you repeat your second question?
Yeah, I guess I was trying to look up from my past notes on the total cost of actually fixing the plant so that this wasn't needed at all. And so some of these costs over the long term, and then with Missoula growing and we're on leased land, I guess my concern, necessarily as much from a committee member, but as a city member, is this pushing a problem down the road that's going to end up being a more costly problem down the road, in essence, just because these are all temporary fixes, it kind of seems like, and if you can't find one that's long-term sustainable.
Yeah, okay. So one thing that is also kind of one of those things is challenging to communicate and get your head wrapped around is we don't actually have to do this. We are not relying on the Poplar facility to maintain our discharge permit limitations. This is a above and beyond benefit, and so we're unfortunately we're not avoiding other costs. This is a voluntary above and beyond project, and the long-term needs for the plant with lower discharge limits, and in the future we can expect the discharge limits to continue to go down, and it will require future investment in the wastewater treatment facility. You don't know what the legislation is going to do. You don't know what the state of Montana is going to do from for a decade or 20 years. Things do tend to move slow. Our permit cycles are 5 years. In order to make a change in a permit, there's a process, and you can expect it to take 2 permit cycles, but there's no guarantee about that. And so the future investment in the plant as Missoula grows, we're talking decades, and it's mostly driven by regulation. We're like right now, our capacity is rated at 12 million gallons a day. We're treating 7.5 million gallons a day. So we have room for the community to grow. We're meeting all of our permit requirements. But if those requirements get tight, it'll take significant investment. And actually that's where the land application would really start to pay off. And we're this summer we diverted about 14% of our total flow onto the poplar plantation. So it's something, but it depends on how low the levels are. If the kind of the worst case scenario is the city of Missoula would need to go to reverse osmosis, which I think is crazy. How many tons of coal are you going to burn to get the last molecule of phosphorus or nitrogen out of the water? I mean, that's not up to me, but it doesn't seem very, it seems misguided. You're putting way too many resources into something that's in pretty good shape. The Clark Fork River is cleaner now than it was 50 years ago, depending on, what attribute you want to talk about. But you want to, spend millions of dollars. 90% of the nutrient loading on the Clark Fork River is non-point source. But because we have a pipe, regulators can point at that and say, you got to spend millions of dollars and install a gigantic reverse osmosis system. So you see where I'm going in the future. There's a lot of crystal ball. We don't have to do the poplar plantation. It can be beneficial. And I think that the really, really low limits are misguided. So I'll wrap up with that.
I appreciate the expansion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to just jump in and more clarify, and then I'll get to Jeremy here. So you said 14% of the total. So that what is that, about 1 million gallons a day is what you put onto the trees?
Yeah, and we can go up to 1.5, and we're averaging about 1.25.
Okay. And so on the permit, so you have a permit that says X pounds of phosphorus per year, but you're doing this other effort. The Poplar farm is not as a part of your permit, your total permit discharge limit, but is a credit toward that. Is that why there isn't a financial benefit to what this thing runs at? It doesn't, it's not going to cost you to take it away because you have to put in a new plant.
Right, we can meet our permit limits without it, and so it's an above and beyond project. Now I had another point there and I lost it.
Yeah, well, is there any financial value to you with these phosphorus credits you're getting as a result of this?
Okay, no, you really can't monetize it. Yeah.
You don't use it against your permit limits at all at this point?
Well, our permit limit is mass based, and so it helps us out. Like it gives me a cushion. So every pound of nutrient that goes onto the trees frees me up, and what can go into the river, which just acts more in assurance of meeting permit requirements. If I have a hiccup, I have a bigger cushion. So it's hard to monetize that, but there is only that benefit.
And can you use this benefit against your MS4? In other words, all the other stuff, particularly the stormwater runoff, and how does the stormwater runoff, non-point phosphorus loading compare to your plan? I mean, obviously we're increasing our runoff as the city grows. So that the stormwater portion is obviously something we're all concerned about, but is there any relationship there, or can you use the Poplar farm for your stormwater component?
I'm not aware of how we could do that. We don't really get credits, and I don't see how we could use it to treat stormwater. So I at this point, I don't think there's a direct connection between the city's MS4 and the Poplar farm.
Okay, sounds good, but there could be. All right, I've got a bunch of other questions, but I'm going to keep going around here. So Jeremy is next up.
Yeah, Gene, on the matrix that you showed before, was there a carbon sequestration included in that? I don't think there was, but I just wanted to confirm kind of that Excel matrix that you had before. And then the second question I had was, can you send out the presentation? I would love to look deeper at that Excel kind of matrix that you showed.
It's attached to the agenda for easy access, but I can email it
Okay.
too if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And go ahead, Gene.
And could you repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, and I just didn't catch it on the matrix. Was there a carbon sequestration portion of that matrix?
Okay, there was they did evaluate climate effects, which sequestration was part of that, but it wasn't. There was also energy consumption and some other factors, but so it was part of it. but not purely.
But essentially a net carbon reduction. If you use less energy, you're using less carbon emissions. So whether it's sequestration or a reduction in energy use, yeah, similar things. All right.
Right. Thank you.
Next up is Trevor.
Eugene, thanks. I think you're going to clear up maybe some misinformation that I might have had about this. I just want to be clear in following up with what Chris was saying is that at this point, the Poplar plant is just ancillary and there's no value for the city. Because I think what the information, at least I was under the impression, was this was done originally because if it wasn't done, the improvements to the plant would have been in the tens of millions of dollars at that time, and so this was to offset that. And I appreciate it. Sounds like you're kind of clearing up some of that misinformation for me.
Yeah, and again, it does give us more capacity while meeting our regulations, and there's still talk about expanding land application. So one possible option would be to create more land application sites. Headed out towards the old stone container site and divert our water out of the river onto more land application, which you'd have to do an engineering study, may cost less than a $50 million expansion of the wastewater treatment facility. So right now we're not depending on it, but it does fit into a possible future, fairly distant future. It is also a possibility to expand it.
Yeah, so not a direct connection, but potential depending on how you look at it. So yeah, that's important to know, because I was under the same conception that Trevor was on that one. So that's good to know. All right, next up is Jonathan.
Hi, Gene. Thanks for the presentation. So is the high 10-year net present cost for the short rotation copacing, is it so high just because of the labor intensity of having to come in and cut down the trees, and then a lack of and just that the market isn't as lucrative for the product of that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it would take some specialized equipment that we would have to purchase, and their labor, someone has to run the equipment and harvest it every year. And then it's not a positive cash flow. It's not especially right now, hog fuel is worth practically nothing. By the time you haul it, 20 miles, you burned up its value. And so there's not a positive cash flow like on some of the other ones. And there's some initial capital costs getting the equipment to harvest it.
Thanks. And with the alfalfa, so is it, I guess, assumed that would be a leasing to a farm operation, or was that kind of the assumption in that?
Yeah, exactly. That would be we would get into some kind of a lease agreement with a farmer and say, we give you the water and here's the land and here's our financial arrangement where you sell the alfalfa, and when we have some part of that, at least to reduce our costs and hopefully to a positive cash flow for us.
Okay, thank you.
So just a little follow up on that in terms of alfalfa. One of my, I'll start with the one question and lead into the next. Can we use the alfalfa in the Garden City compost end product?
Jason, can you chime in on that?
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yeah, we could. We currently don't take unbaled hay or hay and straw and whatnot because we don't want to be bringing in any of those fertilizers or herbicides or anything. But we'd be able to control the growth of over there and what was being applied to that. One concern from our standpoint, personally at the compost facility, is we're really seeing an increase in organics that are coming into the facility right now. We're gonna go into this year and have an overstock like we've never seen before. Whereas 2 years ago, we were worried we were going to run out of organics. And that's really where we started looking at coppicing and stuff like that. So preferably we would see that alfalfa get sold. I think Gene would agree, get sold, cover the cost, and hopefully be able to reinvest in equipment for both facilities and help keep those sewer rates low.
Yeah, you know, we had this discussion. We did that tour with Eugene last year, and one of the things that did come up is that you guys had some fairly large buyers of compost who are doing mine reclamation and whatnot, and that's kind of tapering off, and so the amount of compost that the community uses is far less than the amount of material going in, either from the wastewater treatment plant or from, you know, delivery of vegetative matter, yard clippings and whatnot. So one of the things to look at in terms of the overall wastewater treatment plant, Garden City Compost, Poplar Tree Farm is, you know, the increasing the market for this compost. You guys do a great job advertising. You see the posters. I heard the radio stations. I've seen it in the paper. Hopefully that's working, but it seems like you're so successful with it. This market has to be more regional, you know, into northern Idaho or wherever. But yeah, who's using this? Can we get the agriculture community to buy in to buy this stuff? And so maybe for another day, but the discussion about you know, moving all your compost through the system, creating new markets, sounds like it's going to be a necessary item as well down the road.
As much as I hate to contradict what you just said, very good point.
And that's fine. That's fine. I that's just an assumption. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we're actually, and thank you very much for bringing up the advertising. It's always good to hear that what we're doing. Sarah, Jean, and I worked on that very hard. Especially with all these new folks moving into town. There's so many people that don't know our facility exists. So thank you. You know, between July of last year and July of this year, we've seen, because there was large stockpiles here from previous ownership, we actually seen a drop of 16,000 cubic yards of existing product plus sold will be created here at the facility. So we want to keep seeing that overstock dwindle down, which we are actually working with a lot of agricultural right now. We're trying to branch into that market. We're actually doing a presentation next week talking with farmers and whatnot locally. We've got 2 trial and error locations that we're going to be applying compost, and one of them is a brand new garden that's starting that was on bare ground, and we're doing soil samples, stuff like that. And then another one is a farmer that they've been farming that land for 40 years or so. And my buddy's father that has been taking care of that, very diligent on taking notes, what they did for application, how many bushels they got out of there. We're going to take 1 acre, give them the compost, help spread it, and do soil samples before and after and look at that, because it's up to 30% return that you get using compost and enriching the soil instead of fertilizing it, which actually depletes the soil. So we feel like we're headed the right direction there as far as sales and uptake of product. So hopefully we can get this overstock into farms and into the local parks here in town. And then regionally, we can't really do anything, because as soon as you get into Idaho, Washington, you branch out further than we are right now. There's 500 composting facilities. The more west you go, it's pretty absorbed over there with other facilities.
Gotcha. So one of the questions for all of us, I think, is I go with the assumption that the carbon that goes into the compost as you apply it, whether it's to my yard or to a farm field, that carbon is substantially sequestered, and that's one of the questions I guess we need to look at is you know, the breakdown rate of that. Is the loss of the carbon just going into the vegetation matter? If it's not, is it breaking down through microbial activity, putting out CO2 or methane? You know, but I think the base assumption is that carbon is sort of long-term locked up there, and that's something we need to maybe verify. Maybe you've already got some numbers on that, but that's certainly a working assumption I've got.
Yeah.
Sorry, Gene.
Yeah. No, there definitely is compost has a carbon sequestration value, and it's not locked up forever. It's not like you're pumping it down into the ground forever and ever. But even healthy soil uptakes carbon. And so if you're applying compost and that organic material, it does carbon sequestration for a long time, maybe not forever. And it also depends on how you take care of the soil. But there's an aspect of sequestration there for sure.
Sounds good. Hey, listen, we're running up against the clock a little bit, but we've got there are 3 youth team members, and they're usually very vocal at our meetings. And I think maybe we're running up against some technical understanding. So I want to open it up to Alice and Aviv and Virgil and say, hey, is there anything that this doesn't make sense? Anything you guys want to understand a little better about all this stuff? We piled a lot of information on this presentation.
I think I've enjoyed following along. Thank you guys for all your presentations and information. I think it's obviously seems like a very complicated issue, balancing the economics with the climate benefits and all that. So I'm just enjoying taking in all your guys' knowledge. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Wonderful.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to take in for all of us. And yeah, make this a learning experience. So anyone else? I've got a couple of hands up, and then we'll probably wrap it up. Aviv, what do you got for us?
Hey, thanks for the presentation, Gene. I just had a question for you. I was wondering how much phosphorus is kept out of the river every year.
Well, so in the presentation this year, through the land application project and the poplar trees, we kept over 500 pounds of phosphorus out of the river and 11,000 pounds of nitrogen out of the river. I would have to do the math to talk about the phosphorus coming into the plant that we remove. It becomes part of the composting process, the soil amendment, versus what goes to the river. I haven't done that math, but we do about around a 90% removal. Give me some latitude on that number, but of the nutrients that come in, we remove about 90% before it goes to the river.
So that's fantastic. I used to be on a phosphorus board where we were looking at reservoirs, and phosphorus is such a vital nutrient that we were talking about removing tens of pounds and spending huge amounts of money to do it, to keep these reservoirs from becoming full of algae and then becoming anoxic as the algae died off. And I know it's different in these flowing systems versus the lakes, but about 855 pounds it doesn't sound like a lot, but phosphorus, just such a tiny bit of phosphorus can make so much growth that really is very significant. So Lee, and then we'll get to Jason, and then we'll probably wrap it up.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I was just working to help wrap up the conversation. So Gene, I don't know if you have off the top of your head, or if this is kind of worth additional brainstorming over the next month or so, but how the energy and climate team can help support any sort of gaps in data or ways in making recommendations of what to do next, and how this team can best support your efforts.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific. I think we need to keep lines of communication open and definitely work together.
Awesome. So maybe we'll just plan to kind of touch base with you and let you know what the energy and climate team has to offer and interest in working with you on this.
Wonderful.
All right. Thanks so much, Gene. Thanks, Jason, for joining us and helping out. And yeah, you're welcome to stick around for the rest of the meeting, but I think, yeah, we'll reconvene and continue our discussion and probably bring more questions, but hopefully some ideas forward as well.
Thank you. And very briefly, just because we're talking so much about it, if all of you haven't watched the show Kiss the Ground on Netflix, check it out. It's very, very good, very informational.
All right, sounds good.
Brown?
All right, with that, we're going to move on to item 6.2, which is the update on energy performance contract, proposed projects. One of these might actually be, well, not specifically, but there's a proposed solar project at the wastewater treatment plant, which wouldn't fall under this energy performance contract, but may fall under a different one. So for another day, but let's talk specifically about the McKinstry work and what's going on. And so I'm going to hand it off to Lee.
Thanks, Chris. So this is just really brief. I just wanted to give you an update of where we're at with McKinstry and the energy performance contract. And they're getting very close to wrapping up their analyses. So they've done all of the energy grade audits, and now it's kind of in the hands of the energy performance and engineering teams and contractors to kind of put together the whole spread. So we're anticipating kind of an initial presentation to city leadership the second week of December. And then I think probably shortly after that, we'll bring it to the energy and climate team for presentation as well. And one of the things that I just wanted to kind of prep you for in advance of the presentations is that I've been working with McKinstry to kind of really work on identifying, well, I'm not identifying anything, but they're identifying some different tracks that the city could take with this work. And so the one track would be if the city wants to commit to electrification, which, you know, we have the goal of 100% clean electricity by 2030, 100% carbon neutral in city operations by 2025. It's time, you know, for the city to get serious in its efforts. And so this would be the best case scenario. Go all in on climate action for the different recommendations. And then kind of the other track would be the more conservative approach of doing retrofits or like replacements of equipment that would be more energy efficient, but perhaps not quite the road as electrification would be. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how it all pans out in those conversations, but just wanted to make you aware that there will be kind of multiple recommendations for each of the areas that they've looked into.
Yeah, we just, you know, doesn't matter how much it costs, just get rid of carbon. I'm kidding. You know, cost is always part of the equation. So we've been through this a bunch of times. I know some of you guys are still kind of new to it. So before we move on to the next item, is there any questions about what energy performance contracting is, what McKinstry's doing, how the city and McKinstry are working, just to make sure we're all kind of on board with this. Jeremy.
Lee, can you talk through just a little bit the electrification, that you mentioned briefly?
Yeah, so I guess that would be the idea of rather than, so for example, in many of our buildings, we're reliant for heating on natural gas. And so one of the recommendations for the energy performance would be to just replace that equipment and continue on natural gas, whereas kind of that all in on electrification piece would be to get rid of the natural gas as the heating source or heating power source and switch that over to electrification. There's a lot of different ways to do that. There are some novel technologies out there with ground source or air source heat pumps. And so they're going to be kind of looking at those and making recommendations based on just getting off of natural gas and moving over to electrification in anticipation of the city providing clean electricity, which would help meet our goals.
That's good.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. I mean, right now we get whatever 60 to 65% of our electricity through renewable sources, even if they may be almost exclusively hydro. But yeah, so every time you use a BTU from the electrical systems, only 40% of it is contributing to the carbon additional emissions, where 100% does when you're using methane, natural gas.
Right. And
So-
that's based on the energy portfolio of Northwestern Energy, where we source that from.
They put out a new graph on that with in one of their recent bills, I was going to send it to you, but it's actually a higher number than you guys were using. It was interesting. It was, you know, their little, are you aware thing with their bills. So.
Yeah, please send that along. That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, electrification is one of the keys they keep talking about. My house is heated with natural gas. I have a natural gas stove. I used to have a natural gas water heater and now it's electric. I used to have a natural gas dryer and now it's electric. So as things conk out at my house, it could still take 20 years. The furnace could last 30 years. When it conks out, I'll replace it with an electric one, or maybe sooner. But the idea is if you have a major HVAC upgrade coming, and you could use one of these unique systems where you can add electric to the existing system instead of having to tear out the whole thing or get a payback in 5 or 10 years, then it's a thing to do. I'll note that natural gas prices are as high as they've been in a number of years, but they're still only $5 a million cubic feet in MCF. It's so cheap. Electricity is just so much more expensive than natural gas, but it is getting more expensive. So that's one of the problems we have to deal with too, because it's going to cost more to heat with electricity than it is to get a heat with natural gas. Just to go down that rabbit hole. All right. Any other questions or comments?
I guess quickly on that note, Chris, I don't know if you all are aware, and it's pretty new, so probably not, but Climate Smart Missoula has launched an Electrify Missoula campaign. So you can learn more about it at electrifymissoula.org. And that's based, they're really trying to push on the residential side.
Yeah, and get together with the all the home builders. You know, they're going to be looking for cheap and comfortable and what the buyers want. And so if the buyers see, you know, value in using electric utilities, then they can put it into their houses. But right now, everybody wants natural gas. So that's just what always happens. So yeah, doing some educational things and finding alternatives is a big thing. I personally have always had this thing. I hate electricity when it comes to my stove, when it comes to my, dryer, when it comes to my furnace. I just hate this stuff. And but that's a vision that comes back from when I was growing up, and you just had these crappy electric baseboards, and they cost you hundreds of dollars a month, and they were just awful. They were very uncomfortable to heat, but they come a long way, and particularly when we talk about ground source heat pumps, that I know I need to get an upgrade on my understanding as to how well these systems work as opposed to the natural gas systems. All righty, so next up again, it's going to be a little bit of a joint discussion. We're going to discuss the development and use of the climate lens to type of system to review proposed city projects for potential climate change impacts. So, and Lee will get into this more, but fundamentally, if you have an internal review process, so you're proposing to build a new public utilities maintenance building on Scott Street, and so you're gonna be looking at how much it costs. You're gonna be looking at alternatives. Can we use existing buildings? Anytime you're doing this, you're using a whole bunch of filters to look at whether we wish to build this building. We have not used in the past a structured system to look at climate, carbon reduction specifically. And so this is Lee's idea and her plan, and I think it's really great because we can get this in front of folks like Gene and other folks when they're looking at changing up something, putting in a new building, fixing up a building, and so they can get a little more concrete approach to what this looks like in terms of whether there is a carbon benefit, which under city policy is one of their requirements. We just haven't been able to sort of make it apply in a real concrete way. And so this climate lens helps us do that. So maybe I'll hand it off to you, Lee, to correct any things that I've said incorrectly and to fill in the details.
Thanks, Chris. No, I think that was a really great explanation. Is that in a nutshell, it would be great to create some tools in which the city could use to ensure that every decision made, from purchasing to development to policy to zoning, everything has a climate lens. And so that climate is considered in a meaningful way, not just a box to check like, oh yeah, we considered climate and we're going to move forward in this way instead. But really that there's a meaningful way that we can ensure that all decisions, and this would apply not only for decisions relating to internal projects or funds or that sort of thing, but also projects externally that the city supports. And so, as you mentioned, the Scott Street development, that's a development that's happening that the city is helping to support with MRA funds. And so just to make that distinction, it's not just for city projects and internally, but it's kind of anything that the city's participating in terms of decision making. And so in some internal conversations, we've kind of identified different methods of ensuring this happens. And so one would be to create some sort of tool, a matrix, something that everybody would have to use when they're making decisions. And so that one feels hard. That's the one where I'm really seeking help with. And I know that we kind of talked about that one previously in a different meeting. And another kind of avenue, and I don't think that any of these are mutually exclusive. I think that they can all kind of work in tandem, but would be creating policy. So creating requirements for city employees that they have to follow in order to make decisions. And so a really, I guess, low-hanging fruit or easy one to think about on that end would be an electric vehicle purchasing policy, which says if you are purchasing a city vehicle, it has to be electric unless X, Y, and Z. But it would be a policy stating that this is a priority of the city and people need to follow it. Another method that we've been talking about, which is kind of an interesting model, which has been taken on by a couple different communities and then also a couple different companies, is this idea of an internal price of carbon. And so essentially what that would be is creating a dollar amount for a ton of carbon. And so we could either kind of use EPA has a standard social cost of carbon number that they use, or we could get fancy and kind of do one locally based on our specific threats of climate change, fire and reduced snowpack and drought and all those sorts of things. But if we were able to create a number of this is what it costs our community per pound of carbon, we could then add that on when people are making decisions. So again, using the example of an electric vehicle, you could have, here's the cost to purchase an electric vehicle versus the cost to purchase a regular vehicle, except they would also have to add on this price of carbon over the lifetime of the vehicle in the purchase price. And so then when you're kind of looking at the comparison, it might actually make more sense than to buy the electric vehicle when we're considering the cost of carbon. That one is really interesting. It has been pointed out, though, that that should not be the only tool that the city uses, because carbon is one tool for analyzing the climate impacts. And so there's also resiliency and other greenhouse gas emissions and all those sorts of things. And so I don't think we would just want to use an internal cost of carbon as our decision-making tool, but it could be added into some other methods, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'll leave it there for any questions or thoughts. But I know when we talked about it before, there were quite a few people on the call who are interested in participating in this activity. So really appreciate any help.
So right now on that group, we've got Jeremy, Jonathan, Scott, who had to step off, and Trevor. We may, Jeremy, if I can put you on the spot, help to organize this work group to get started on some of these ideas.
Yes, I would be happy to.
All righty.
I guess just for clarification, Lee, would Would it be, so you presented 3 different kind of pathways there. Would we support you and work on all 3 pathways, or would you recommend that we start with one? Kind of logistically, how do you think that would go best?
Yeah, great question. I think support in all 3 would be really great. I think from my impressions of talking with city leadership, the idea of creating a tool is kind of the priority, and that the tool, whatever that would be, would then help to lead into policy. It would actually not only help us justify the decisions that we're making as a city, but also to identify areas where those decisions aren't happening and we actually just need to require it.
You know, we saw from Gene's presentation, one of these, they call them a risk matrix, and it was that 5x5 box with the different colors. And so how you do this is you use a risk matrix. Basically, over on top, you might have cost of carbon, you might have implications to, resiliency, you got these other things, and you've got the stuff on the other side, and you create a matrix, and then you sort of create it as a red, green, yellow sort of thing. If it comes up red, this is bad. If it comes up yellow, maybe we can work with it. If it comes up green, you can go ahead and do the project. And so I've done a lot of these risk matrix. So when we get that chart that actually Jeremy requested, that Megan said will be included in the minutes, that's one of the main ways that we would go through this. But then within that, you have your subsets. Like I was looking up what the cost of carbon is right now. So with the EPA, it's $51 a ton for CO2, but it's $1,500 a pound for methane, and it's $18,000 a ton for nitrous oxides. So it's interesting how they price those out that way. So clearly, when you say, okay, we're gonna buy a truck, and it's gonna be 10 tons of carbon a year emissions. So 10 times 51, $500. So that's going to have to be factored in. So when your $10,000 truck is there and you're going to have it for 10 years, it's 10 times 5, it's $5,000 you add onto the price right there. And then if you compare that to an electric car, which costs $5,000 more because it just costs more, maybe they offset each other. It's one of those slots. And then, looking at, how does this help the city prepare for long-term impacts of climate change? Does it allow for water conservation? Does it allow for improvements in infrastructure against flooding? Does it help us with air quality? An improvement of an HVAC we could put a filtration system and improve air quality against wildfire smoke, and all these things. And so it does get a little complex, and that's why these risk matrix are really good, because they can bring a lot of data together in one way. But this is just one way to go about it. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing to consider, and I agree, I think some sort of matrix. One thing to consider as we're thinking through this is that there are so many decisions made on a daily basis at the city, and we have to create a tool assuming that whoever's using it knows nothing about carbon or very little about carbon or climate action or whatnot. And so it has to be an intuitive enough tool where it's not causing a huge burden on the two of us, working in this department, to have to answer all types of questions of impacts and analyses and that sort of thing. And so I think that's where it gets really hard, is that this will be used by people who are not climate experts.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have an online tool. I mean, you guys use ClearPath right now to assess the carbon emissions from the whole city. And I was actually looking for one of these, but it would be a little one. You turn it on and say, okay, I need a new truck, estimate the number of miles a year, estimate the mileage, and get something out of it. And so it would be a series of check boxes or yes, no's or drop downs. I mean, that would be kind of ideal to do some sort of online tool like that, like we do with ClearPath, but obviously a much simplified version of that.
Chris,
does that make? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Chris, just real quick. You said the $51 a ton for CO2. 18,000 per ton for nitrous oxide. What was the number for methane according to the EPA?
$1,500 a ton.
1,500. Thank you.
And these numbers are going up under our previous national administration. A ton of carbon went to $1. And I think a ton of methane went to $5. So they're back up to where they were under the previous administration of that. But they're the DEQ, the CEQ, the Council of Environmental Quality, which sits in the White House. For those folks that don't know, who help oversee a lot of the environmental processes that the federal government uses, regulations, policies, procedures, they get to do all this stuff. And the EPA is another part of that. They're reevaluating these numbers. And so one of the things that's going to happen is that $51 is going to go up because the cost of carbon is even more. And what they're going to see is it's $51 in 2021, but it's $60 in 2022 and $80 in 2023. And so you factor in that because the idea is that carbon is going to get more expensive as things get worse. And so, so to think about this too, for folks that don't know how to price carbon, it's those indirect costs. So I can buy a truck and it costs me $20,000, we'll make it 40 or 50, but and so you're trying to find the costs that are not in that $50,000. And those are almost always involved in environmental costs, air pollution, water pollution, carbon emissions. They're also involved in the impacts to underserved communities and environmental justice and how groups are impacted negatively by having a chemical plant next to their community. And so you're starting to look at these things like, oh, we're going to kill another 1,000 people because of increased emissions. And so you got to price that in. So that's one of those indirect costs. And so when I buy my widget and it costs me $10,000, there are additional costs that are not seen as part of that widget that we're trying to analyze for and add that cost back in, because that widget does not pay the cost for the long-term impacts of climate change. It just simply is not in there at all. There's no way right now to make it in there. You know, when we start buying and selling carbon credits, we'll start factoring that in there. And so it's starting to happen, but right now it's tough, but it's those indirect costs that we're really looking at. Does that make sense to you, team members, other folks? Do you have any questions about it? Because it's a little, to me, it's a little non-linear how that happens. All right, I assume we're going to do a test and everyone's going to know all the answers. Kidding, sorry, no tests. There will be no tests. All right, so at the end of our agenda, there is room for team member comments. You can espouse on almost anything you want. Hopefully it's climate related. One of the things that I am always interested in is, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to get the folks in Washington to do something about climate. And the folks in Washington are going to, you know, the COP meeting in Glasgow, and they're going to say, well, we all need to do this. You guys need to do this. And so got all these people up here saying, okay, we're going to reduce, you know, by so many tons or so many degrees. And I always wonder sometimes if any of that is really worth a hill of beans, you know? Does that really translate to what we're doing here, putting in a solar panel at the wastewater treatment plant, you know, calculating the cost of carbon, you know, when we buy a widget. And so this is my personal opinion is I think we spend a lot of time trying to get our politicians to do the right thing. And so maybe they pass some legislation or put a little money into the budget, but mostly it's the stuff that we do every day in our personal life or working with the city or whatever, where I think most of the real positive impacts for climate change are going to be. But I guess that's just the way I've always applied my life in terms of approaching these issues. But I don't know, that was just a little soapbox journey I took. Jeremy?
Yeah, Chris, I agree with you. I think it, all translates back to, think globally, act locally, do your small piece, and it has a huge impact. It does bring me back to one of the things that Jean was talking about, as far as the additional amount of organics that are coming into the compost facility. And I didn't get a chance to ask him specifically, but I wonder what's driving that, the increase in organic matter coming in.
Yeah, I went out there the other day to look at the Poplar farm, and they let me drive around the compost facility, and the number of vehicles, many of them from lawn services, I think, that used to take this stuff to the landfill, as they become aware of the ease and the low cost. All these landscaping companies and folks working in the yard are using it where things may have gone to the landfill before, but I don't know that. But it was amazing, the lineup of trailers and pickups and whatnot dumping off yard waste there. It was impressive. We'll take a tour of this, by the way. We put it off for a little bit, probably toward the spring, but we're gonna take a tour of this, and it is amazing the amount of compost they have out there. It is a lot of compost. So anyways.
Chris, another thing that we've talked about in the past is a tour of the landfill as well. So we may. Yeah, right. So as we know, again, for the UT members and other folks, when you put putrescibles in the landfill, and putrescibles are things that rot, so basically any organic matter, if left in an inorganic environment, that is without, meaning anoxic environment, without oxygen, microbes break down organic material and produce methane, and they produce a lot of methane. So right now they take that methane, they put it through a stack and they burn it, and so it actually doesn't emit methane, it emits CO2. But at the same time, if we can divert putrescibles from the landfill, less of it's going to be emitted either as methane or CO2. And so certainly everyone's talking about how to do this. We have an entire program called 0 by 50, which we're going to go zero solid waste by 2050 or something. I know that's the idea, a big challenge, but recycling is only a little piece of it. Really, it's how you take your organic waste and make it into something that has some long-term carbon sequestration. For example, your yard waste going to Garden City compost, or what I do is I put most of my waste here. You can compost it yourself and have a pile, but I don't really have a place for that. I just put it down the garbage grinder. Well, all that waste is captured at the wastewater treatment plant and becomes Garden City compost. So it's kind of a handy little way to do that without having to have a bucket and a big old compost thing in your backyard. All right, enough soapboxing. Thank you guys. Again, we're going to be delayed by a week next year. We've got at least one work group going. There might be some other things that we're going to be working on. Next month, right, Chris?
Next month. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I thank everybody for their time and effort today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Good.